immigration charges to Naval Station at Guantanamo Bay, which I know you're very familiar with. In March, I traveled to Guantanamo Bay with several colleagues to have a firsthand examination of the detention operations underway. And I certainly have serious concerns about the cost involved there. To date, can you tell us the total cost for detaining individuals at Guantanamo Bay?
You want the cost per individual?
Do you have that?
I do not have that with me today, sir. I can get that for you.
Well, I do have a number. Do you know how much it costs to hold an immigrant in ICE detention facility in the United States? Do you have that number?
Are you talking per day? 100 and I believe the last estimate that I got was $142 a day, around in that approximately, per day.
Yeah, but it's close to what I'm understanding. I understand it's $165 per day, so it's in the range. I'm still waiting for detailed financial information from this administration from my time to Guantanamo Bay. In fact, a letter with Ranking Member or Chairman Paul and the Ranking Member together, we wanted more information on the costs there. When I was there, the 2-month cost estimate for operations was $43 million when we were down there talking to the officials there. And that does not include transportation to and from the island. We find that people are sent to the island and then they're sent back to the United States again before they're sent out. I'm not sure why we have all those costs. We have plenty of ICE facilities to keep them here. Why you have to send them there and back. And on the day that I visited, there were 87 people in custody. And my understanding is that's a pretty normal number. At that time, at least. So my back of the napkin calculation, we're waiting for your numbers, is that it's costing about $100,000 a day to keep someone at Guantanamo Bay. Man, this is like ripe for Doge. Why is Doge not down there? We're spending $100,000 a day to keep someone at Guantanamo, and we fly them down there, we keep them there a while, then we fly them back to the United States. Or we could keep them here for $165 a day. I think that's kind of outrageous. So, I'm concerned by the staggering cost of this, and I would hope, Secretary, you could commit providing this committee a detailed breakdown of the total cost of that operation there. There were just a sea of empty beds. There was all sorts of security folks and nobody in those beds, which is why it's so expensive. So Chairman Paul will probably use this on his Festivus report later, I'm sure, of outrageous government spending, and I'll look forward to seeing that. Secretary Noem, are you familiar with Section 872 of the Homeland Security Act of 2002?
It sounds familiar, sir. You'll have to remind me the topic, yes.
Well, Section 872 requires you, as Secretary, to provide a 60-day notice to Congress of any creation, deletion, consolidation, or alteration of organizations within the department that are not required in statute, which must include an explanation for the rationale behind any charges. It also prohibits you from making any changes to offices in the status. So my question for you is, why have you not provided notice to Congress of the changes you are making at the department? And will you be doing so in the near future? And will you include intended reduction in forces in that? For example, you've already terminated virtually the whole Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Office staff without any communication to Congress about your intent. And the only letter yesterday claiming all of the statutory responsibilities would be met, you sent a letter, but it conflicts certainly with the whistleblower disclosure that I received last week. So please explain to the committee why you are not following this law.
Well, Senator, we are following that law. Those offices that you referenced are still open and functioning and providing their duties as required, but they have been right-sized. Many times the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, or the Ombudsman Office, which you and I visited about before, had grown quite expansive. They were used as a political tool, suing and attacking each other and censoring individuals and not doing the job for which they were created. So we've right-sized them, put them back on mission, and if there would be an instance to where notification is required, I certainly will follow that.
Time has expired. Senator Moreno.
Thank you again, Secretary. So following up on the themes that were just brought up, it seems to me that the most common sense answer and the least expensive way to house criminal aliens in the country is to not allow them to come here in the first place. Right? So it's whether it's $160 a day, $100,000 a day, it should be $0 per day. And I hope that my Democrat colleagues, let's just codify what President Trump has done and prevent criminal aliens or anybody from entering this country illegally. That seems like the most fiscally conservative thing. So I hope when you're talking about these questions to the Secretary that we just say, let's just stop allowing people to come into the country illegally. By the way, that doesn't mean we don't want people to come here legally. Mm-hmm. That's the hypocrisy I just don't understand. When you're decrying the cost of housing criminal aliens, but you turned a blind eye when we had 10 million people come into this country illegally. Shifting gears real quick, you were a governor. It surprised you to learn that you're rated one of the top 5 most fiscally conservative, frugal governors in America last year?
No, it wouldn't surprise me. I worked hard at making sure we were accountable to our taxpayers.
So you are going to commit, and I think it'd be obvious, that when you are appropriated money through the reconciliation process to help you do what you need to do, that you're going to be as fiscally prudent with that money, correct?
That is correct.
All right, so let's talk about what they need. Certainly there's a wall, but wall by itself, to Senator Peters' point, doesn't accomplish the mission. There's all kinds of advanced technology. I was visiting Anderle. They have some incredible technology for detection that makes the Border Patrol agents' lives. You're looking at technology like that, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the discussions that we've had quite often with members of Congress and in these committee hearings is just the wall will look very different based on where it is. Plus, the wall was never finished, even where you have a steel bollard wall. Many times they erected the steel bollard wall, but didn't build out the technology to support it and to keep individuals from throwing ladders and ropes over them. There's a whole system that was designed to operate together. And even when the wall was built, President Trump was never given the opportunity to complete the system that would actually secure it much better than just simple infrastructure.
Sure. So physical barrier, tunnel detections.
Yes.
Technology
surveillance.
And some of these technologies can determine the difference between an animal and a human, can direct Border Patrol agents safely, let them know what they expect when they're there. So those are all the technologies. Let's talk about another part of what I would call the wall, which is the human element. How was the morale of the Border Patrol agents when you got there? When you took over day one and you visited them, kind of describe briefly what that was like.
Well, they were very discouraged. If you remember, many of us
I think you're being kind with discouraged.
They were not allowed to do their jobs. They hired on to Border Patrol and ICE. I would say it's the same story to do a job, and they weren't allowed to do that by the last administration. So now they're.
So there's recruitment challenges.
Oh, absolutely. There was, but not anymore. I mean, Border Patrol has a dramatic increase.
We have to make sure we pay them properly.
That's correct.
So that's part of the money, right, that we have raises for them. Near and dear to my heart is the automobiles that they use there. Describe the insanity of the kinds of vehicles that Biden and Mayorkas was giving. These are the most rugged terrains in America, boulders and rocks and hills. And they were sending F-150s out there with 17-inch wheels. And how many of the fleet was down just because of total and complete inability to accomplish the mission?
At times, it was upwards to 30 to 40% of the fleet just was unusable, not able to be maintained. Times the percentage would increase based on the conditions to which they were deployed as well.
And I know you and I have talked about this, but I just want to reinforce it on the record. We have a great company that builds cars in Ohio called Jeep. They make a Gladiator that would put giant tires and wheels on a car, and they would be an amazing Border Patrol agent. And I think even our chairman would love to see new automobiles so that the Border Patrol agents can do their job. And that's certainly part of the funding. Would that be something that you look at?
Yes, it's something that we need to address. We have to. In order for them to do their jobs, they have to have the right equipment.
Last question, is there anything else that we might not have asked you that you think is important for this committee to know?
Well, I think that you've covered a lot of the components. We haven't discussed the Secret Service, and I know that that's been a big topic for this committee in the past. I have the ability and the responsibility to oversee the Secret Service, and I just want you to know that we've gone away from the DEI recruitment directive that the Biden administration has utilized to recruit agents and what their purposes are, and we've made sure that they have the ability to do their job and protect the most powerful. And one of the statistics I think you would find to be helpful is we have an over 200% increase in applications to work for the Secret Service because of the work that Sean Curran and his team have done to really tell the mission and story of what they do every day and how important it is.
Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you. Secretary Noem, on May 5th, the Customs and Border Patrol, Border Protection, CBP, quietly rescinded, I'm not sure it's even been reported, their, quote, processing of pregnant and postpartum non-citizens and infants, end quote, policy, which was issued on January 28th, 2022, citing it as, quote, obsolete or misaligned with current agency guidance and immigration enforcement policies. That January 28th policy memorandum followed years of inadequate care documented by a report from the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security showing that the treatment of pregnant, postpartum, and nursing women and infants was just horrendously and horrifically inadequate. And a recent site visit by Senate Judiciary Committee staff confirmed that this problem is continuing, that pregnant women being detained do not have access to adequate health care. Do you agree or disagree that babies and pregnant women within CBP and ICE custody should receive care that are tailored to their specific needs? And why, in God's name, would that policy be rescinded providing that care?
Well, Senator, I will look at the specifics of that policy and what was changed as of May 5th. I would say that everybody that's incarcerated or is brought into custody and is in a detention center is receiving appropriate care, and that we are making accommodations for individuals that have different physical
but as
situations
a matter of fact,
or
it's
pregnancy.
not happening.
And so I will look at the specific policies as to why one of the requirements may have been changed or adapted. If you have a specific to point out, that would be fantastic.
You
that,
don't know about this policy?
I do know
decision?
about the policy change, but I've looked at the guidelines of how we handle
You do know
individuals
about
that are
the policy
pregnancy.
change. How could you allow it to happen?
Well, sir, what are you finding wrong with what we do with individuals who are pregnant that are in our detention centers? Is there concerns I should be addressing?
Women who are pregnant or who have just had a child and their infant babies are not receiving adequate medical care.
Everybody receives
you
medical care.
concerned?
Everybody receives medical care that is in our custody, and even
Why
if
was
they are
the
going to be
policy
returned,
rescinded then?
even if they're going to be returned back to their home country, we are making sure that they have medical care in their home country before they are sent there. So that is something that we do very diligently, is to make sure that anybody who has a medical issue, a concern, something that needs to be addressed is taken care of in those detention centers.
What you are telling me right now is factually untrue.
No, it's actually
more important, you
It's followed through with
permitted
every
a
single
policy
day.
to be rescinded that provides for adequate care because it was, quote, obsolete or misaligned with your agency's guidance and immigration enforcement priorities. How can you sit here and tell us that caring for pregnant women or infants or women postpartum is misaligned with your priorities?
Yeah,
It just boggles
everyone
my
who's in
mind.
everyone who's in our care and in our detention centers
But it's your
receives
policy
medical
not to
care
care
that is
for them.
appropriate to them and their specific condition. Absolutely, that is
You're
happening.
about to lose a fifth of your workforce in FEMA, correct?
There are individuals in FEMA that are no longer working with us. They may have taken early retirement or
How are you
deferred
going
retirement.
to
They
meet the
have-
needs of our constituents
Mm-hmm.
in Missouri or Connecticut, which suffered floods recently? I saw FEMA in action then, as I've seen them over the years. They are dedicated, vigorous public servants. They appear and spend hours and days and weeks caring for people. You're losing a fifth of them, including most of the leadership. What's your plan to replace
We've got
them?
many people in FEMA that do very good work every day taking care of people that are in a crisis situation, that are experiencing the worst day of their lives. The problem is that over the years and under the Biden administration, they failed the American people.
You're not
They didn't
answering my
respond-
question,
Oh, I
Madam
absolutely
Secretary.
am.
How are you going to replace a workforce
You
that
can't
is
convince me that
absolutely
any
essential
federal government
to
agency does a better
helping the
job just because it has more
constituents in Missouri?
people.
You
More
just
people
committed
does
to
not
help them.
equal
You're not going
a
to be
better
able to
job.
help
Better
people
job
in
is
Connecticut
accountability to
or
people and
in
making sure we're
Missouri
taking
or
care of
anywhere in
them.
the country if you don't have the dedicated public servants in FEMA, and you're losing them.
Time has expired. Senator Kim.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Secretary, I saw the proposed budget, and it showed a decrease for FEMA non-disaster grants. It was a proposed cut of about $646 million, but it didn't clarify what programs you thought that needed to be cut. So I guess I just wanted to ask, is the nonprofit security grant program one that you're considering cutting?
Well, we're having discussions with the White House on grants that will be continued in the future. The president firmly believes that FEMA needs to be eliminated as the way it stands today, that it needs to be reformed, and that states and local governments should do emergency response with the support of the federal government. So he believes it shouldn't be in the long-term recovery, 20 years later, still waiting to make claims to go out. And many of the grant programs within FEMA were moved over into climate change priorities. They were moved over into building bike paths and shade infrastructure and planting trees, when really, if it is a disaster and if we need to mitigate something happening in the future, we should be building better roads and bridges and putting in bigger culverts in areas that need to be addressed, not necessarily planting shade trees in parks with disaster recovery dollars. And that's what people need to remember, is all of these dollars that come from these grants, many times they're pulling out of that disaster recovery fund. So I think this evaluation of every single grant is appropriate. Many of them, after they're evaluated and are found to be appropriate, they're deployed. But that examination is something I take very seriously, that I need to do to make sure it's on task for why that grant was established.
Look, I'll just say point blank, I think the answer should have been a clear no. And I think that there's very strong bipartisanship here in Congress, especially in the Senate, to protect the nonprofit security grant program. It's literally the best tool that people in New Jersey are telling me is needed to be able to counter anti-Semitism. You know, I can't tell you the number of synagogues and temples that are lined up to try to get this type of funding. In fact, you know, given the rise of anti-Semitism that we have in our country right now, you know, we should be surging resources, not cutting. So, you know, I would hope that you'd have a more declarative no in that vein. And because, you know, I'll be honest with you, I've been trying to see if we can dramatically increase funding to the nonprofit security grant program to try to fight this scourge of anti-Semitism. So I guess I just want to ask you, would you be open to supporting an increase in funding to the nonprofit security grant program if I'm able to work with some of my colleagues to be able to do that?
We definitely have seen the value in that program and are willing to discuss this with you. What I would say is that we have to do an evaluation to make sure those dollars are going to the appropriate entities that they were intended. So they have been very important for many different people in different communities, and I recognize that. This evaluation and work with you on how that program can be improved will be very important.
Well, look, I want to engage with you on this further, because when we're hearing this language about abolishing FEMA and whatnot, you know, one of the elements that people have raised most concerns about is what does that mean for the nonprofit security grant program? So I really do urge you to work with me and this committee to have a declarative stance on that, so people, especially those concerned about anti-Semitism, can have clarity on what comes next. You did raise the FEMA Review Council, which you said is going to be meeting for the first time today. I just wanted to see, because we've talked about this before, about what comes next. I wanted to see if you would commit to working with this committee and hearing our perspectives as part of the council's work and giving us an opportunity to engage before the committee concludes their work and finalizes recommendations. Is that something you can commit to?
Yes, absolutely. There are several things that FEMA does that need your input, statutory requirements. This is a reform process that most certainly will include you in this committee.
Yeah, that's something I know we talked about before you were confirmed, and I hope we can follow up on that, because I think it's incredibly important. Everyone here recognizes that reforms are needed. Right. But now the question is just how it is situated, and I certainly have some thoughts I want to reflect from the folks in New Jersey. As mentioned earlier, hurricane season is upon us. Do you have a sense of when the White House is going to announce a full nominee for FEMA administrator?
It should be soon, but I'm not going to put a time frame on President Trump and his
just, you know, again, we want to have confidence that we have the leadership in place to be able to do this. The last thing I'll just say.
We do have a leader in place, and I can connect you with him as well. I'm sure
Well, I'll make
Dave
sure we
Richardson
follow
is
up,
the
but
acting
it'd be good to
director.
have that formal nomination. The last thing, and maybe we'll just do this in a QFR, but there has been reports of cuts to the national database tracking domestic terrorism. DHS cutted the funding. I just wanted to ask, is that correct? And is there any way that you could reconsider that and see if we can make sure we're tracking domestic terrorism rise in the country?
I can follow up with you on that and get you that information.
Okay, thank you,
Yep.
Secretary.
You're almost done. You've outlasted everyone but me. And you don't have to necessarily answer this. You can comment if you want. But I think one of the problems I've always had with discussion of the border is that people who often are conservative and talk about fiscal conservatism, once we start talking about the border, then it's all out the window. So the estimates on the wall, I think, are important. I don't think it's a very conservative estimate. It's more like $30 million a mile as opposed to CBP says 6. You said 12 for current. It's somewhere in there. But I also would say that you're controlling 95% of the border without a wall right now. So that's an argument that maybe you don't need a wall, you need a willpower. And I give President Trump great compliments, for what he's done and what you have done. I mean, 95% of the control. No new bill, no new money. Now, I'm not saying no new money is needed. I think you need more border patrol, and you're going to need more money for that. But I think it should be within reason. Now, if I were in charge of the border, though, and I wanted immediate control and I wasn't quite there yet, I would put 100 helipads down, concrete, about 50 yards by 50 yards, and I'd put 100 helicopters along the border every 10 miles, and I'd simply use technology to patrol the border, and I'd pick anybody and everybody up who crosses the border illegally with the helicopters. And I think you could do that, and you'd probably do it for $500 million versus $46 billion. So I know the wall has a great symbolic value, but I think we should reassess what both the cost, what we want to do, and how much it costs, since we are controlling 95% of the border. I think part of it is you've moved some money forward that needs to be replaced. So I'm not against or calling for no money, but I do think that the $46 billion is not justified unless we see something else from the administration.
Okay.
Thank you for your time today and your commitment to work with the committee. The hearing record will remain open until 5 p.m. May 21st, 2025 for the submission of statements and questions for the record. The hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman.